open source revolution, transforming the landscape of AI.
Hi guys. So as we navigate through this unnerving world of finding a replacement for ourselves and whether the opportunities will outweigh the risks, there's something that's on everybody's mind as to how the FANGs are centralizing up near the top and controlling the narrative because they've got the funding. Like OpenAI just wanted to put in like $1 trillion into the development of particular type of chips and to grow the AI field in that way, but at the same time, the walls will be there, right? So Google is in that competition, all the FANGs are in this competition. So what's our alternative to having a world where Cyberdyne of Terminator winds up ruling and all of the other negative sci-fi movies that we've seen? So our savior in this is open source. So open source allows us to have a voice. So from like the blockchain perspective, that would be the equivalent of having a decentralized system, right? So that's what blockchain gave us. It gave us decentralization. And open source also acts in a similar manner where we would have a narrative, a voice. So you have the FANGs operating as the big companies. Then you have for the rest of us, we have the open source where contributions come in from different people. However, with that being said, the difference that's occurring, because this is a unique time and a unique tech that we're currently involved with because of its prowess and because of its ramifications. So while open source continues to give us this voice and it gives us an option outside of what this corporate world will bring to the table and somehow continue to enslave us in the way that it has in the past, open source is the benefits of open source are at the same time the risks of open source. Because open source automatically means that you can have coders who come in from the FANGs to look at the open source code and then go back and implement it into their code. And then when they have the wherewithal and the power to do that, they can continue to build the walls, infusing open source within it. So while open source has no walls, they have the walls. So not having the walls, it helps us to build a prowess competitor to what the FANGs build, but simultaneously, they can also come in and take the best practices and the best code and put it in there. And this is actually not two, like them versus us. There's a third element to this. This is actually a triangle, because the third is the governments. Because the governments also are looking to utilize AI to keep a competitive edge and a military edge over their competitors. And they can also come into the open source world to take code and be able to use it for military purposes, again, building walls. So you have walls here on the FANGs, you have walls here with the military, but at the same time, in the middle is open source, and open source is more like an open garden. So this is the big challenge that we have, is that it's a place where others can come and pluck any flowers that they want. So that being said, open source has to be managed in a way that keeps it in a different state, right? So that sounds pretty depressing, that either way we don't win. So the only way forward for open source and the positive light we can get from this is that we together have to make open source 10 steps ahead. Not as far as AI prowess, but as far as its depth of development. Because if we do that, we can remain ahead of the militaries and ahead of all the FANGs. So how can we do that? Question is, well, they have all the money, all the resources, the governments can print the money, and these FANGs already have endless money, so how do we compete in that world? Well, the number one thing that they need is our intellectual prowess to build this. So a company can hire 1,000 coders. A military can hire 1,000 coders. But in the open source world, can be 100,000 coders. So that is our edge. Power to the people will help us grow and keep the power for the people. because we've already seen how the other two want to centralize and keep power within theirs. But we can shift that dynamic primarily because we have the numbers to do that. And we can build an alternative narrative where there is no other way, that they see it as there's no other way. It's an inevitability. But this is the sliver of hope where if humanity runs in this direction collectively, then we have not just the highest number of people contributing, but we also have global contribution. While the FANGs want to centralize the power to the corporate side and for their own benefits, and the militaries want to do that for individual countries, you will have, in the open source world, everybody. Everybody, which basically means competing nations, people from competing nations will all be in there. So that's the hope for humanity, to collectively stay ahead of the curve or of these two world aggregators. They're basically aggregating the power within their hands by utilizing the most powerful tool that's ever been birthed on this planet. But our great escape out of this trap here, is to collectively come together and develop something so much further ahead in not just prowess, but in global input. Because if the military puts something together, or even the corporations put together, they cake in their own set of biases. But in the open source world, you cannot actually have those biases. Why? Because it has contributors from competing nations. You'll have the Russians, you'll have the Chinese, you'll have the Americans, the LATAM countries, and people from the Middle East. So you have a global scope on that AI, and that will probably be the only way we get to develop an AI that looks at us in a beneficial way, in a way that allows humans to succeed in a world where we're feeling sad and depressed that we don't have a future here and we're going to get replaced. This is the only way we actually will not be replaced. We will have a partner in the future to not only help us live better, but to solve the diseases. Remember, the money's not in the money's not in the cure. The money's in the medicine, and that's why we don't have cures for so many diseases, and our loved ones just die from it. So this is where, and even for wars, the same principles, the same technologies being used to isolate and help a few at the expense of the many. But this is where we break the line. This is where humanity has an opportunity to globally come together and build the highest and most powerful technology to actually serve humanity, irrelevant of the religions, irrelevant of the cultures, because it will speak in one voice of humanity, taking into consideration each and every one of us and seeing us as one, because the others want to build walls and will not allow us to come together that way. But we hold the power. We hold the power in politics as well, but we don't utilize it. We hold the power against the corporations with our money. We vote with our money of the companies that we want to see succeed. But either one is a losing narrative, because we use the protection of the governments and the tools provided from the corporations to derive our livelihood. But open source is not determined by security or by livelihood. Open source is a beneficial endeavor where we can all come together and deliver to humanity a world where we don't suffer from this isolationist mentality. We've come a long way through history where we've tried all sorts of experiments. The Romans had their experiments, the British had their experiments, Alexander the Great had that aggregation experiment, and they worked to a certain extent. Or the Chinese, 5,000 years of successful civilization, but then they became the middle kingdom, which means they're above humans and below gods. So they're the middle kingdom, right? So they did great, but the Chinese civilization didn't impact or help the people in Africa. It helped the Chinese. So all these were selected, isolated attempts at helping humanity. But this, if we start seeing open source as our way to deliver to all of us a collective way forward with the most powerful technology, we will actually be not only in the driver's seat, but we'll finally be able to have the winning hand in this game that's so stacked against us. We can actually win if we all come together. Thank you.